Hey there, world history students. Tree Hall here, and the purpose of this video is to give you a little bit of help with the final project, Project 2 final essay. And there's going to be two documents that I'm going to be covering in this, or that you're going to need. One is this slideshow, and you'll have a link to download the slideshow or view it that goes along with this video. Another one would be the Renaissance timeline, which is actually linked right within the slideshow as well. So if you download this or get to it when you get into the body paragraphs, I put a link to the timeline. And the timeline is just there to help you get events or developments to discuss in your essay. So with that, I'm just going to go into my presentation now. And let's go ahead and talk about this. Alrighty, so I promise you that if you watch this video, you'll walk out with a solid plan of attack on how to write your essay. But just because of the unique kind of topic that you're given here, I think this is a fairly straightforward essay. But before I go into the structure of the essay, like I usually do in my videos, I want to just briefly discuss a little bit of history, kind of talk about the idea of humanism, then we're going to organize the essay. So hopefully I can do this fairly quickly. So one of the things about the Renaissance that you notice, it's a real turning point in history. If you look at the time before the Renaissance, things are medieval and very different than after the Renaissance. And the Renaissance really is that time. You know, I love medieval history. It's interesting. It's kind of fascinating because it was so different than the world we have today. But the turning point is the Renaissance. And one of the things that you see after the Renaissance is you begin to recognize the world of today. And they even call that era from 1300 to about 1800 the early modern era. And then, of course, 1800 to about 2000 is the modern era, or today is the modern era. So anyway, let's kind of just discuss this for a moment. The first thing I want to do is I want to define the idea of humanism, because this really is the heart of the Renaissance, and this fuels everything. So if you go to Wikipedia or somewhere to an encyclopedia and you look up humanism, which really is the idea that's at the heart of the Renaissance, the definition is that it's an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasize common human needs, and seek solely rational ways of solving human problems. And that is a bit of a modern definition too, because the interesting thing about the Renaissance is these people were definitely Christian, and they definitely looked to God for inspiration and the divine. I mean, they came out of the medieval era. You couldn't not be. But at the same time, what differentiated Renaissance European thought or Renaissance thought from medieval thought is that people were really important. You know, if you want to synthesize the idea, you know, the thing about the medieval times was God was the only thing that was important and people were not. If you want to kind of synthesize the two ideas, the way that people of the Renaissance thought is man is the most important of all of God's creation, and man, probably more than anything else, is going to carry out God's will in this world. And so even though, because that was one of the things that was interesting about the Renaissance, their Christianity kind of fuels them, even though they really felt that man was important, they also did have this divine. And probably the best way to look at humanism is man is the measure of all things. The other way to look at it is they kind of had this idea that, you know, in order to fulfill who you were meant to be, you really try to become all that you can be. That was how they saw man was. They saw that as really, really important. And under humanism, ambition is no longer looked down on like it was in medieval times. Acquisition of wealth, that's not a problem. Trying to achieve excellence is not a problem. Trying to develop your mind, even, you know, they looked at it and said, okay, maybe the Bible doesn't tell us a lot about science. Maybe what that means is we're supposed to discover that ourselves. And it's really the idea of humanism is really the idea of man fulfilling his full potential. The picture over on the right, by the way, is a picture drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. I think it's called Vitruvian Man. It was just kind of one of the first anatomically correct pictures of a human being. In its natural state, it's naked, but I censored it. Some people even think this might have been a self-portrait because that's kind of what Leonardo looked like when he was younger. Most of the pictures we have of Leonardo is him older. But I chose to use this because the thing about Leonardo da Vinci is he was what they call a Renaissance man. And even today, that term Renaissance man means a person who is good at not just one thing, but all things. You're not just a good student, you're a good athlete. You're not just a good athlete and a good student, you're a good artist. You're not just a good athlete, student, and artist, but if you're religious, you're going to be a good religious person and you're going to really pursue your religion to its end degree, like the Protestants did with the Protestant Reformation. So that's the idea of humanism. And I think it's important to just take a second to understand that, because I think this is going to kind of flavor your essay and it's going to really tell you what to look for as you move forward and you start to write this. This fuels every change that comes out of the Renaissance. This is at the heart of every change. Now what I want to do is do kind of a compare and contrast. So there's two pictures in this slide. The picture at the right is, if you were to look up the definition, you go to Google Images and look up medieval manor, you'd get a picture like this. Matter of fact, you'd get lots of different pictures like this. And during medieval times, after Rome collapsed, for about 1,000 years, people had to be economically self-sufficient. The roads were not safe, and the basic economic unit of medieval times was the manor. And of course, we're all familiar with like the knights and the peasants and the priests. Well, it's all in this picture. In every manor, you had a church. It was surrounded by farmlands. You had a castle where the knights lived to protect the manor house, where they protected the people that lived in this little village. Everything those people needed to live in this village, they had. There was a blacksmith shop. There was a shoemaker. There was everything. Now, economically speaking, the world economy was like at a halt. I mean, no one remembers the medieval era as being an especially rich era, but that's how they survived. There was not very much trade because people were economically self-sufficient. That began to change towards the end of medieval era as things became safer, as kingdoms became more established. They established trade routes, and you got the rise of towns, which were centers of trade. And that is indeed one of the things that caused the Renaissance. Now, the picture underneath that one is the picture of the world trading routes around the year 1750. And one of the first things you should notice is the entire world is connected through trade. And one of the most important developments of the Renaissance, economically speaking, is that people went out and explored. And of course, what was their rationale for exploring? They wanted to make money. And wherever the explorers went, trade followed. And by about 1500, or maybe 1550, the world became interconnected economically. And what's interesting is it's been interconnected economically ever since. So one of the huge differences between medieval world and the world of today that was caused by the Renaissance, because the humanists said it's okay to be wealthy. It's okay to actually want to live a life where you're not like just struggling to make it. It's okay to be comfortable. One of the changes economically was the world economy just grew by leaps and bounds, and the entire world became connected. And we even have a term for that today, the global economy. That was established because of the Renaissance. Let me move to the next slide. Okay, again, a bunch of pictures here. And I picked the three categories I'm going to cover in writing my essay. There's a lot of different changes that the Renaissance made. The first category I just showed you was economic changes. This is in the realm of science and technology, and I kind of really went more towards science than technology here. The picture up in the left is a picture of someone bloodletting. So in medieval times, they really didn't have a whole lot of knowledge of the human body. They were actually afraid to dissect people. It was prohibited by the Catholic Church. And the early scientists, they actually had to pay grave robbers to give them fresh bodies, and it was totally illegal. And they had to do this all, in a hush hush. And so because they really knew nothing about the human body, one of the most common medical practices, if someone got ill, is somebody would come by, usually a monk, not even a doctor, would come by and put a hole in your arm and bleed you out. And if they got a bowl full of blood, and they considered that they had gotten the bad blood out and you were going to get better, probably caused more harm than it helped. Now, the other pictures that you see here, two of them come from Vesalius's book, Human Anatomy. And but again, Vesalius was just one of many scientists during the Renaissance. And I just chose this. You can see a very detailed picture of a human brain, and then on the right you can see a really detailed picture of it looks like the circulatory system, but there's more. You can see muscle, lungs, heart, but you also see veins. I mean, they really got an idea of the way that the body worked, and there were many people that were doing this. And then there's also a picture of Copernicus's crazy idea that our planet revolved around the sun and not the other way around. So that's the heliocentric theory. If you go to our timeline, I've categorized everything into different types of events, and you'll see that there were tons and tons and tons of scientific and technological innovations that happened outside of the Renaissance. And the way that humanism fueled all this is people actually said, man, you know what? The human brain is an incredible instrument. We can use this to discover anything we want. And really what ends up happening that comes out of the Renaissance, a huge innovation that causes all these others, was the innovation of the scientific method. Let's actually look at the natural world and do experiments and have hypotheses and see what works and what doesn't. And really that just fueled, they called it the scientific revolution, because so many inventions, it was just like back-to-back invention and technological development all happened as a result of the scientific method and as a result of people actually using their brain and their reason to look at things. And even so much as people would print up articles and they would say, this is what we did. And after a while, and people would read these and they would try to replicate these experiments at home. And people even realized, without any government getting involved, hey, we need to actually test these experiments. And they began to form scientific societies in London and Paris, where they would, if you wanted to publish an article and make a name for yourself as a scientist, you sent it to the society. They would do your experiment. They would replicate it. And if it worked, they would put their stamp of approval on it. They would say, this is real science. And that's a practice that has endured even to this day. They call it peer review. You think about when scientists do studies and stuff, how do we know that they're really telling the truth? Well, people actually test that. And they began to do it during the Renaissance. And again, I kind of was thinking about using a picture of somebody on a horseback in 1300, and then versus somebody on a train. But trains weren't invented until the 1830s, so I decided not to do that. But there were all kinds of technological innovations too that we could spend hours going over. But I'm trying to point out the difference between the world in 1800, world in 1300. And again, Renaissance fuels this because of humanism and the desire to rely upon man's reason. There's a bunch of pictures here, so let me kind of explain these. The picture in the background right here, this was Europe in 1300. And what is important to know is there were some of the countries you're going to begin to recognize, like France. It looks almost the same as it does today, although there's a big chunk of France that's missing, Gascony. Spain was about 4 or 5 different little countries. England was, that's why they call England the United Kingdom. It was like three countries here. And actually, no, it's 4, because you have England and Wales. And what I'm trying to point out is in 1300, if you looked at Europe, and actually even in much of the world, maybe not China, you see these itty bitty countries. Even like India was probably 300 different little countries inside the Indian subcontinent. And then if you look at the map at the upper right, you begin to see, especially among the Europeans, these large world empires. I mean, everything in orange is the Spanish Empire. Everything in green is the Portuguese Empire. And then in brown is the French Empire and England. And if I were to do the same picture in 1900, by 1900, the European nations had colonized the entire world. Everything belonged to somebody in Europe. So one of the big changes you see in government that results from the Renaissance was the establishment of huge empires based on governments in Europe. Because under humanism, hey, if you're going to do government, if you're going to be a country, you might as well be a big country. You might as well have an empire. Don't just rule your little land. So you see that was one of the changes. Another change was even the type of government. And of course, if you think of government in the 1300s, you should think of kings and barons, lords, dukes, and knights. And then we get a huge change. In the picture down here where you can see "In God we trust, God is our strength." By the way, if you recognize "In God we trust," that's from our dollar bill. That was the Puritan motto. Remember, the Puritans came over to America and became pilgrims, and they were the ones that established our government. But before they did that, They even overthrew the English government and established a Puritan government there. And one of the things that was kind of interesting about the Puritans, and actually many of the Protestant groups in general, is they actually felt that kings should not be the only people that were ruling. They felt that every king should answer to a parliament, which is made up of all the people. And you see them spread that type of government wherever they go, which, one place, a direct conclusion to that, you can see over on the far right, we have Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, and they are editing the Declaration. You can see a bunch of papers on the ground. They're editing the Declaration of Independence as we declare our independence from Great Britain in 1776. And over here, you may not recognize this picture. It's a little less famous to us Americans, but this is very famous to French people. This picture is called the Tennis Court Oath, and this shows the National Assembly and the people of France declaring independence in 1789. They made an oath. They said, we are not going to leave this tennis court and stop pestering our government until we have better rights. And so a huge change that comes about because of the government, or because of the Renaissance, is you see a shift in how people are ruled. And by the way, that's like the last change, because the noblemen didn't go out without a fight in most cases. But people actually began to say, you know what? Is a king and queen the best way to rule? Just because we've done this for 1,000 years, is this really the best type of government we can have? And they began to look into the old Greek and Roman forms of government, including democracy, like we saw in Athens and Rome. And they said, why don't we give this a try, version 2.0? So these are some of the changes. And again, what I'm hoping you're seeing just in these 3 slides is that conversion from the medieval world to our modern world, because that is what the Renaissance does. So enough said on a history lesson. Now let's go to the actual essay. All right. Always when you do an essay, the first thing you want to start with is an essay topic. And usually I read these out loud. I'm actually only going to read I'll read this out loud, but I want to point something out. Typically, when you see an essay topic, the top part, this is kind of what you might call a preamble. And then the bottom part is actually your topic, what you're going to write on. Now, you might say, why even bother with this preamble? This is all this junk, and it's not really what I'm writing on. So why not just eliminate that and give me what I'm writing on? Well, this is important. What the preamble does is it gives you a little bit of background information, which kind of tells you the direction your essay is going to go in. So when we look at this, the Renaissance was just primarily a cultural movement that occurred in Europe from 1300 to 1700, means rebirth. Well, what was being reborn? European culture, political organization, and economics. In short, the world. During the Middle Ages, European culture was dominated by the Catholic Church, and government and economy were feudalistic. This begins to change in the 1300s, and the institutions that govern Europe and later really are going to spread through the rest of the world begin to be recognizable to us living in the modern era. The years 1500 to 1800 are considered to be the early modern era, and the Renaissance is what transformed medieval Europe into modern Europe. Now, notice the word transformed, you see medieval, you see modern. Now we get to the essay topic. Using your knowledge of key historical developments during the era and the lessons from units 3 to 5, write a 5-paragraph essay of 600 or more words that explains how the Renaissance transformed Europe and the world between 1300 and 1750. Now, if you go with this preamble, you realize the answer to that question is it changed the world into the modern world. What was born during the Renaissance was the modern world. And so that's why that preamble is important. It gives you a little bit of background. Now, let's go into more detail using your knowledge of key historical developments during the era and the lessons from units 3 to 5. Okay. Write a 5-paragraph essay of 600 or more words that explains how the Renaissance transformed Europe and the world between 1300 and 1750. Your essay must address at least 3 of the following topics: artistic and cultural development, political and government development, economic development, religious development, scientific and technological development. Now, the reason I include this is sometimes when you write essays, your body paragraphs will be suggested to you in the topic, and sometimes they won't. One of the things that's good about our curriculum is it generally does, and you need to cover at least 3 of these. This is going to become important when you go to organize your essay. Let's move to the next slide. Now, first step in writing an essay is turn the topic into a question with a question mark. Using your knowledge of key historical developments during the era and the lessons from units 3 to 5, write a 5-paragraph essay of 600 or more words that explains how the Renaissance transformed Europe and the world between 1300 and 1800. So our question is, how did the Renaissance transform Europe and the world? And actually, we'll just go with the world from here on out because this is world history. How did the Renaissance transform the world between 1300 and 1800? The reason it's important to turn your topic into a question with a question mark is because it does two things. One, it clarifies what you're writing about. So it lets you know what you're going to be writing about. Two, your thesis statement is going to be a one-sentence answer to this important question. So to have a good thesis statement, you should have a sentence at the bottom of your intro paragraph that says, the Renaissance transformed the world between 1300 and 1800 by, or you can even drop the dates, just say the Renaissance transformed the world by, and you need to suggest how. You can even say the Renaissance transformed the world by converting the world from a medieval kind of place to a modern place, or the Renaissance transformed the world by beginning the modern era. You just need to have some kind of answer that has some of the words from the question in it. So that's why it's important to convert these into a question with a question mark. It lets you know that you have a solid thesis statement. You know, I've been grading essays for 16 years, and I can tell you the funniest part about essays is when it comes to thesis statement, the most common error is not a wrong thesis statement, it's a missing thesis statement. It's just one of those things that people kind of forget to really clarify in there. Most of the time you'll see in kind of inferred thesis statement, they kind of, they don't really mention it, but they write about it. It's good to have a really clear thesis statement. That's why it's important to do this. Okay, the next step is organizing your essay. We know that you have to write a 5-paragraph essay. That was in there. And it has to be 600 or more words, which generally is what a 5-paragraph essay is. Your essay must address 3 of the following topics. Again, sometimes your organization is given to you in the topic, sometimes it is not. You have 5 different categories listed here. Now, do you see any pattern of organization here in the topic? Always with essays, you want to go with the easiest thing to do. So if you know you have a 5-paragraph essay, you know that the first paragraph is going to be an intro paragraph and the last paragraph is going to be a conclusion paragraph. And you know that because of that, you need to have 3 body paragraphs. You also know that you have to address at least 3 of these categories that are listed. The easiest way to organize your essay is pick 3 categories and those become your body paragraphs. Don't try anything fancy. Keep it simple always when you write. Makes it better. So you must discuss how the Renaissance transformed the world in 3 categories. And once you've picked your 3, now you have what I call an essay map. Your entire essay is going to answer this question. How did the Renaissance transform Europe and the world between 1300 and 1750? And then you're going to have an intro paragraph. Now, for my sake, I picked 3, and I'm going to talk only about these 3. But remember, you can pick any 3. You pick the 3 that you feel you're best able to write on. I chose economic, science and technology, and politics and government. That doesn't mean that that's what you have to choose. But what the essay map does is it tells you, in my first body paragraph, I'm going to talk about economics. In my second body paragraph, I'm going to talk about science and technology. In my third, I'm going to talk about politics and government. Then I get a conclusion. So that's what it tells you. Next, your intro has to do 2 things. So you map that out. And by the way, by mapping that out, let me go back one, I guess. By mapping that out, it will save you tons and tons of time when you write the essay. It will cut the amount of time that it takes to write the essay in half. Now, intro, conclusion, detail. Your intro has to do 2 things. One, it has to introduce readers to your topic, the Renaissance and the changes it brought. That's how you begin your intro. You want to start, maybe you can start in medieval era and get to the modern, but basically your topic is the Renaissance. And also the time that comes after it. This is a long time period, 1300 to 1800. So kind of think about that when you come up with your topic. And then your intro has to introduce the topic. It has to answer the topic question. Most good intros are about 5 to 6 sentences long. So keep in mind that your last sentence gives your thesis statement. The other 3 or 4 sentences are the background information that you need for your thesis statement. Don't forget your conclusion needs to do 2 things. Remind the readers about your topic and restate the thesis. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, body paragraph detail. each of your body, our entire essay is going to answer this question: how did the Renaissance transform Europe and the world? And each of the body paragraphs must address the essay question in a topic-specific way. If my first body paragraph is economics, then I need to have a sentence that addresses that question in an economic way. And here's my sentence: how did the Renaissance transform the world between 1300 and 1800 economically? If my second body paragraph is science and technology, it answers this question: how did the Renaissance transform science and technology between 1300 and 1800? My last body paragraph, which is government and politics, answers this question: how did the Renaissance transform government and politics? One of the things you should notice is that all of these questions look almost identical, except that the topic is slightly different. The topic of the first one is economics. The topic of the second is science and technology. The topic of the third is government and politics. The reason it's important to organize your essay: do not mention anything about government and politics in the science and technology paragraph. That should be about science and technology. Do not mention anything about economics in the government paragraph. That should be economic or government. It allows you to separate. Now, the other thing that's important too is remember that each of your body paragraphs is a one-paragraph answer to these questions, and you must discuss key developments from your lessons in the timeline to answer these questions. Okay, now, body para 1 detail. How did the Renaissance transform the world economically? Inside this body paragraph, what you want to do is you want to click that Renaissance timeline, and I showed that to you in the beginning. You want to pick 2 or 3 economic developments from the lesson. If I was going to do this, one I would be the development of the Medici Bank, because without banks, you don't have any economic development, and that was the first real modern bank. But I would probably pick some other things too. You want to discuss 2 to 3 economic developments, and then within the body paragraph, you need to describe the 2 or 3 items. That's who, what, where, and when. Dates are always good in a history essay. Always, always, always. Then you need to explain. You need to identify the connection to the Renaissance, then describe or explain how these events transform the world. Now, another thing that's important to think about this: the first part of your body paragraph, which is about 3 or 4 sentences, a good body paragraph is 6 to 8 sentences. The first 3 or 4 sentences is Wikipedia. Who, what, where, and when. You're talking about information. The next 2 to 3 sentences, usually a little shorter than the information, is where you're explaining how that fits into your topic. Your topic, remember, is how the Renaissance transformed the world. And so if you talk about the Medici Bank, you need to say, this helped create the modern economy because this bank lent it an interest. It kind of set the pattern for all the banking, and it became one of the largest banks in Europe, and everybody could borrow from this, and they could, borrow money and send their ships all over the world and make money. So the second part of your body paragraph doesn't come from Wikipedia. It comes from your brain. And here's the good news: it's not necessarily right or wrong. There's just logical and illogical. So, for example, if you talked about the Medici Bank, what would be bad is if you said this bank hurt economic activity and caused no one to borrow money. That's not logical. This bank didn't grow the economy. No, that's not logical. It did. So you need to just make sure that logic governs this. Going to body paragraph number 2. How did the Renaissance transform science and technology? Same thing. You use the timeline. You pick 2 or 3 scientific or technological developments. You do the Wikipedia stuff, who, what, where, and when. Then you explain them. Now, here's something that's important. What if your explanation is a little short? You know what? Add another event. Make your body paragraph about 6 or sentences long. If you have lots of good information detail, you're going to get a good grade on your essay. So that's important. You do need to have an explanation. You do need to have the second part in red. You need to explain the connection to the Renaissance and how these things changed. But if you're having a hard time do that, make sure you just include more information. It makes your body paragraph good anyway. Last, when you get to the government body paragraph, you do the same thing. You pick 2 or 3 political developments or governmental developments. You describe them, who, what, where, and when, and then you analyze, you explain. So that's what you do in all 3 of these. If you do that, you're going to be fine. Also, again, I'm a big person that believes in counting. A good body paragraph is at least 6 sentences, and usually the really best ones are 8. So look at your body paragraph when it's done. Is it 6 sentences? Is it more? If it's not, add some stuff to it. Look, when you're done with all 3, look at them. Do they look about the same length? Because believe it or not, it does hurt your score when you got like 2 great body paragraphs and then an itty bitty short one. And that happens a lot. The short one's usually the third one. So take a look at these and do this. Now, at this point, you should be ready to go. And I'm hoping that by listening to this and looking at my slideshow, you're like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I got a handle on this. I know what I'm going to do. Don't forget that the entire essay is answering this question: how did the Renaissance transform Europe and the world? Don't forget that your essay must address the topic. Give factual examples from the lessons in the era. Again, use that timeline. It'll give you, everything that's on that timeline you can look up. Be 5 paragraphs long and be at least 600 words long. Don't forget when you go to write this to have your essay map sitting in front of you. Know what you're going to put in each body paragraph, what choice you've made, and then just go to it. When you have an essay map and you've made the choices of what you're going to write about, you will see your essay goes very quickly. Anyway, thank you for watching my show. Wish you the best of luck. If you need any more help, feel free to give me a call. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.